Yeah, I don't know what just happened with week 2 of college football. This is an honest reaction. This is the morning after, NFL football season is about to start. So I want to get this video out before, I sit on this couch and watch some more football because you just can't get enough. But this week of college football was chaotic, to say the least. And as I'm, doing research, trying to rewatch games, because when you go to a football game, especially an 11 a.m. slate, you miss the early games. I was able to watch most of the night games on my drive back, but I had to go back and watch some games. And the biggest takeaway that I had was I had a lot of takeaways, objectively. If you go on the channel, I did not do a week 1 recap video. There was none there. Outside of like specific reactions to specific games, there was no overall recap video. And I usually don't like doing those because I like to be very precise with what I want to talk about. Like if I'm going to want to talk about one specific matchup. Yeah, we'll do the week 2 previews and predictions. I like doing those, but the recaps, I want to be very specific on the takeaway. But when you have this volume of like 10 plus games to talk about, I have to put it all in one video, and you'll probably see me cut up this video that you're watching right now and, spread it out over the week with specific takeaways for each matchup. So I'll put timestamps down below for each matchup if you want to watch all of this, or if you just want to watch specific discussions, just go check out the description down below. That's where I'll put it. It just may take me a minute as soon as this is uploaded to put it in the description. And with that being said, I'll self-promo before we dive in. Welcome to Rush the Field. Genuinely, if this is your first time seeing this face, seeing these videos, all I'll ever ask from you is to talk football with you once again. I have a goal of 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, but that really doesn't matter to me because at the end of the day, I want to build a true community that isn't just built off of metrics. I want you guys to discuss football with me. And if it's a like, a comment, a subscribe, and that's how you want to show support, it means the world to me. But we got a lot of football to talk about. I don't know how large this video is going to be. Genuinely, there's going to be a lot of stuttering. There's going to be a lot of mess ups and a lot of mistakes because I can't go 40 minutes without, making one mistake in a video. So we're just going to go ahead and dive right on in with the biggest game of the week. The biggest game of the week on paper was Michigan and Texas. You had college game day in Ann Arbor. You had big noon kickoff in Ann Arbor. I just don't have a lot to say with this game when we're talking about the actual football that was played. And I'll explain why. It's just because when we talk about the winner with Texas, and how they won this football game, it's a good win. Objectively, to go into Ann Arbor and beat a Michigan team that just came off a national championship, if you just read that headline, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is a marquee, monumental win for Sarkisian. And I'm taking it a step back because that's like saying, think about TCU when they lost to Colorado week 1 just last year. They were the runner-up for the national championship. Objectively, that's just not the same team. Now, I'm not saying 1-for-1 TCU and Michigan are the same talent level because I know Texas fans are going to see this and go, oh, he's just being a biased A&M fan. Aggies are going to Aggie. Not what I'm saying at all. You can also agree that this Michigan team, and I said it going into this season, was just not going to be the same team at all. I think the play style that they wanted to run on the offensive end takes a very specific game manager type of quarterback. That's what J.J. McCarthy did at a very high level, and he also had the mobility to extend plays on third down. That was like his, gem. That was his superpower, was when Michigan wasn't able to, move the ball running it on the first 2 downs, or if they got in a situation with a 3rd and long, J.J. McCarthy was poised in the pocket and was able to either be very decisive downfield or run the ball. And Warren or Orji clearly are not the answers at quarterback. We haven't seen a ton of Orji, but clearly if they're not feeling confident with him being on the field, he's not going to be the answer. I don't think so, because his play style does not match up with anything that J.J. McCarthy wants outside of running the football. And then Warren is a system quarterback who's just not that special. I love his story. I think it's fantastic, but it's not enough. It's not enough to beat a Texas team that's really damn good. It'd be one thing if we thought Texas had some concerns about going into an away environment and winning. We saw it last year when they went to Tuscaloosa and beat Nick Saban in Alabama. So there's not questions there of whether or not Quinn Ewers can show up in a big moment in an away environment. There's no questions there. There might have been questions about Texas's running ability, and it looked good. And I think just Texas looked like the team that can match up with a top tier physical Big Ten team. The one thing I'll disagree with Texas fans on, outside of just maybe they're overhyping this win, just I think Michigan was overrated. And that's just my personal opinion going into the season. It's not like hindsight after them playing. I'm like, oh, Michigan was overrated, I guess. No, I thought this team was not as good as people thought they were on paper as a top 10 team. I think they're still a good team, just not top 10. Texas cannot sit here and try to tell me that they're going to easily beat the last year Michigan team. Not with this team, but like last year, if say they beat, I don't know, Washington and we're in the national championship and they would have wiped Michigan. That's weird. I saw Kieran tweet it. Ignore that. That's why. Just I hate the hypothetical game in that sense. But I just don't have a lot of takeaways. I know we've talked about this matchup a lot, but objectively, you got like, I don't feel better or worse about Texas. They clearly are a top 3 team in the nation. They look really good. I know I was like a little bit lower on Texas, but I want to see how they play against Georgia. I want to see them, clap back against Oklahoma after losing last year. So there's still questions I have about Texas. I don't think it's all answered in this Michigan game. It's still a great win. I just wouldn't take away too much information from this matchup specifically. We did not talk about Arkansas, Oklahoma State leading up to the weekend. And I honestly regret it because I thought it was a fascinating matchup. Taylor Green, when they played Arkansas Pine Bluff, which I understand, you just heard the school and you're probably like, there's an Arkansas Pine Bluff. Me too. They dominated, scored a touchdown every single drive. Going against an Oklahoma State team that Arkansas, objectively, being an SEC school, just has more talent. And you have Bobby Petrino and Jaquindon Jackson. They all look electric. And here's the biggest thing. I thought Arkansas had a real chance to win this game. They played like it in the first half. Going into the season, I got a ton of pushback from Razorback fans because I said, your head coach is probably going to get fired. And I thought Arkansas was going to be one of the worst teams in the SEC. I had Vanderbilt in front of them. And I got a ton of pushback talking about Taylor Green being that guy. All the pieces that played really well in this game. And it just didn't matter because at the end of the day, if you are going to mismanage time like this and fumble and crumble in the second half of games like this is what happens. Let's talk about it. I'm going to steal something from Josh Pate. Not going to be a paper pop, but a notebook slap type of a stat. Would you believe me if Ollie Gordon was 17 carries for 49 yards that Oklahoma State would win this game? I mean, that is the baseline of their entire offense, is the incredible seniority on the offensive line and Ollie Gordon. That's their offense. Alan Bowman in his 18th year starting, just not turning the ball over, which he did. He had one pick. Would they win that game? And also on the flip side, would you believe me if they were to, on the flip side, with Arkansas, get 232 yards and 3 touchdowns? Jaquindon Jackson lived up to what the hype was with this team. Taylor Green had 400 yards, and they still lose this game in double overtime. I mean, it was an electric game that you just sit there, and I hate to be the guy that has the A&M thing behind me and being like, oh, how demoralizing this win was for Arkansas to lose this game in the way that they did. But objectively, you're up 21-7 at halftime and you lose 39-31. That's a heartbreaker. And the way that it happened was heartbreaking. I'm concerned about Arkansas. They're going to be an electric team. I'm going to Texas A&M Arkansas this year. And that's going to be a big game to kind of determine the trajectory with Arkansas, because it just feels like time and time again, they get into these big positions to make a marquee win, a major stamp of approval for Sam Pittman. I think of they were in a dogfight with Alabama just last year, and they cannot get to the finish line, finishing the job. And when you see this problem across the board and it continuously happens time and time again, you start to wonder, is it really the players or is it just being able to finish the job as the coach? Because at some point you got to point at Sam Pittman. He was almost out the door in the offseason. You begin to wonder, if you keep doing things like this, is he going to be fully out the door by the end of the year? I made the prediction that Bobby Petrino would end up being the head coach, and it's 2 weeks in, and it is a growing concern in my heart for the Arkansas Razorback faithful. It's time to have an honest apology to Kyle McCord. Objectively, I love Syracuse. I picked them to win this game. All love to Haynes King and Georgia Tech. We can all agree on two fronts. A, their win against Florida State gets less and less impressive by the day. Just does. Because now that Florida State was overhyped in the preseason, Georgia Tech gets a top 10 win. Georgia Tech thus then becomes ranked. And now Syracuse gets a ranked win. But why do I love Fran Brown and Syracuse? I thought this was a team that could sneaky, like when we're talking about the route to the ACC championship, you get to November and you're like, Syracuse is in this? Mainly because of their schedule. And they brought in a ton of talent into the transfer portal. You know, Elijah Robinson, I have not personal ties, but, you know, as a fan of Texas A&M football, you obviously have ties to Elijah Robinson, the defensive line coach that was the interim head coach once Jimbo Fisher left. That was a major piece for Fran Brown to get. And Syracuse across the board added great pieces after great pieces from the transfer portal. And this was a team that I think people would kind of blink and realize, wow, they kind of flipped the switch this year. And you get them at home. I'm talking about them and as in Georgia Tech. And I just thought this was like, you're favoring Georgia Tech, but you get Syracuse as dogs at home. And this was the coming out party for Kyle McCord. We're talking 32 of 46, 381 and 4 touchdowns. That's impressive. That's not the quarterback we saw at Ohio State. Sometimes it's as simple as going into an environment where you're supported, you know you're the guy, and I think that's the difference for a guy like Kyle McCord. And I'm really excited for him for the rest of the year. I objectively will always say that I was wrong with Kyle McCord. I was excited for Syracuse. I just didn't know about Kyle McCord. And I got to be honest, man, I was wrong about him because I trashed him a lot in Ohio State. If he was standing in front of me, I would shake his hand and say, listen, I was a dummy dumb, whatever you want me to call myself that represents an absolute terrible opinion. That's what I would say to Kyle McCord. It's an honest apology. He deserves all the respect. And this was a marquee win for Syracuse. Now let's talk about Georgia Tech. It is definitely a punch in the gut. This is an ACC loss. I don't want to discredit their win against Florida State, but like I said at the beginning, we overvalued Florida State a ton. They now have a top 10 win that by the day kind of gets worse and worse, like by not even by the day, probably by the second. And Haynes King definitely had to carry the squad on this one. And Georgia Tech still has a great offense. I just think their defense still has questions. This is a 3-point loss. So both of these teams, their seasons are not over. They're still in the hunt for the ACC. It's going to be Miami, Clemson, Gap. Everyone else kind of figures it out because Virginia Tech still doesn't look as impressive as I had hoped with all their returning starters. But huge win for Syracuse, and I have to mention them in this video because this is the formal apology to the man, the myth, the legend, Kyle McCord. This game was not on my bingo card. This was Notre Dame's Appalachian State. Whether you want to think of the Michigan loss when Appalachian State really put themselves on the map, or you could think of 2022 when they went into Kyle Field and beat Texas A&M. I have so much to talk about with this game. This game, I didn't even watch all the way through. I watched the very end, and then I went and rewatched the beginning to just kind of see where everything began to crumble. I'm so happy for Northern Illinois. Let's talk about the winner first. If you have not taken the time or if you've not been on social media, find the video of Northern Illinois' head coach talking after the game. Enough said. I would love to hear your reaction from it, but that definitely, tugged at the heartstrings. I love that passion about the sport. It's why I love college football. That presser right there is why I love college football. In Northern Illinois, God bless you. Because listen, and this is so weird and random, but I love Northern Illinois for a long time. I was a huge Jordan Lynch fan. I don't know why. I remember even on podcasts when I started doing content creation, I called him one of the most electric players in college football. I love Jordan Lynch. Therefore, I loved NIU. And I've always kind of supported from a distance. I have no connections to this school. I even started a dynasty with them on College Football 25 just because I loved Jordan Lynch growing up in 2013. I thought it was so cool that there was a quarterback that rushed for 2,000 yards. This is a top 50 rusher of all time in college football at the quarterback position. And Northern Illinois had never beaten a top 10 team. Never. In their history, they had never done it. I think it's 0-14 at the time. They go into South Bend and beat Notre Dame, the number 5 team in the nation. They were favored by 30.5 points. Let's talk about the flip side, because we can talk about Northern Illinois all day. This is bad. Can't remember a time where we've seen a head coach go from a marquee win, a milestone win, going into Kyle Field and beating Texas A&M. Whatever your thoughts might be on Texas A&M, you call them 8-4, Texas in mid. I do not care. You could be objective in the fact that they were a tough place to play. And it was a tough game. It was a grueling slugfest between two really good defenses. And you come out and you're hoping maybe the offense can look a little bit more electric than it did last week. And I had my reservations about Notre Dame on the offensive side of the ball. I didn't think Riley Leonard was a big needle mover compared to Sam Hartman. You have the experience of Sam Hartman passing the ball, but you get the mobility for Riley Leonard. It's a give and take. I thought Jeremiah Love was going to be electric. I thought Bo Collins and the wide receiver room was going to be just good enough, but they were going to lean heavily on the defense because the defense looked incredible and made Connor Wigman look like a undraftable player, not even like an undrafted free agent, undraftable. And Connor looked really good this week. And trust me, as a Texas A&M fan, like a lot of people kind of, do the correlation of Texas A&M and pointing and laughing at them. They just lost to the team that lost to NIU. I mean, I'm happy for NIU. I'm not going to be cynical and sit here and go, oh man, we could have done this. The A&M loss to Notre Dame sucks. And Connor Wigman, if he just played 20% of what his normal is, they probably win that game. But he played his worst game of his career. There's nothing you can do about that but move forward as a team. I genuinely, if anyone tries to troll me about the whole Notre Dame loss, I know it sucks. They should have won that game. They were in the perfect environment and position to win that game. I also blame Ted Cruz, but that's for another point. You can't lose this game if you're Marcus Freeman. You give the pass to the loss to Marshall at home, but now this is 2 egregiously bad losses. Really bad. Especially knowing that Notre Dame does not have a conference. Therefore, they do not have a conference championship. Therefore, they do not have an automatic bid. Therefore, they have to be based off of their resume. And when you have as light of a schedule as Notre Dame has, this is a baseball bat to the knees. Because now the discussion begins, hey, if they just went 10-2 for the rest of the year, say Florida State was up to stub and USC and they lost those 2, but they beat Texas A&M at home, that would get them into the college football playoff. This was a baseball bat to the knees. Riley Leonard wasn't good enough. This team was not good enough. Notre Dame, this is a bad loss. I don't have a major takeaway outside of the fact that this is just egregiously bad. There's no paper popping stat outside of just you didn't do enough and you just came out flat. Like that, these types of losses, when you came out so focused and you were agile and you were one of the most polished teams, even with some of the flags against Texas A&M in that environment, and you come out on the next week, just 7 days ago, like this, that is how you go from the marquee, monumental milestone win to concerned about your job security in 1 week. That's why college football is great. Notre Dame, man, it's a bad look. Now it's so interesting because now Notre Dame goes from, or at least Texas A&M, let me flip it. Texas A&M hoping Notre Dame goes undefeated to make that loss look better, to where now Notre Dame is wanting Texas A&M to look incredible. I love college football, man. It's a great win for Northern Illinois. Could not be happier for this program. Now let's speed run a couple of these. These won't be their own videos, but we could talk about Iowa State, Iowa. Iowa looks like the same team, really good on defense. I'm so happy. Rocco Becht season. I was very high. Pardon me. I was very high on Iowa State. It made me very happy that they were able to pull this game out. I have been on the train that this team is going to be really good. Big 12 gets a major win against a really, really good Big 10 team. This was going to be a close matchup regardless. It seemed like Iowa State was down and out and they'd made just enough plays. An incredibly clutch kick. Could not be happier for this team. Objectively, it was awesome to watch. Let's talk about Texas State and UTSA. You may be asking, why is he talking about this? Because I graduated from Texas State. What the hell is a Roadrunner anyways? First time in their school history, they beat UTSA. They win the I-35 showdown. And Texas State, after kind of pulling the starters too early against Lamar, then it turns into a dogfight, dominates UTSA, a well-coached team. You don't really know what UTSA is overall, but you know Jeff Traylor is a very good coach, a soon-to-be Power 4 coach, dominates them at home. Marquee win, monumental win for Texas State, and very excited for what they could be as a Group of 5 team. Speaking of Group of 5 teams, though, let's talk about two of them before we talk about the Oregon debacle. We could talk about Bowling Green, mind you, coming out, I think it was Connor Balzak, former Missouri quarterback, if you really know, you know, has been playing football since 2019, in a dogfight with Penn State. This is what I mean, chaos was upon us when we're talking about the college football season in week 2. 7-point win for Penn State. I mean, I'm pulling it up as we talk, but just 7 points. Bowling Green was seen as going to be one of the lower level teams. They even threw 2 picks. Now, Penn State's always going to be able to run the ball, and it's going to depend on how much they trust Drew Aller. Aller had some really good throws, but 146 of his 204 went to one wide receiver. Just objectively, Bowling Green's quarterback played really well. This is what I mean. I don't have a ton of takeaways. It's a red flag. You don't want to be in this much of a dogfight with a Bowling Green if you're Penn State, especially coming off a major win against West Virginia. I don't know if it was Super Bowl hangover. Shouldn't be your Super Bowl. But have to highlight it in a chaotic week where you have a bunch of Group of 5 teams popping up out of nowhere. The next one we got to talk about very easily is Tulane. Tulane was in a dogfight with Kansas State. Kansas State pulls it out. Avery Johnson just has to be better. He is a young quarterback, so I'm not out on Avery Johnson. They were going into a hornet's nest. That was a trap game. That's a huge takeaway for Kansas State. To go into that environment and be able to win is not nothing at all. I understand it's Tulane. They were in an absolute dogfight for 90% of that game. And for them to win it is huge for that program. And you may think, oh my gosh, it's Tulane. How is that a major win? Objectively, being able to go into that environment, Tulane is not a normal Group of 5 team. You still should have won by multiple touchdowns. But if you end up in a dogfight and end up still winning it, I'm going to give you some credit there. I'm not going to give as much credit to Bowling Green and Penn State, though. And then another shout out to Tennessee versus NC State. I think NC State was a little overrated coming into the year. Grayson McCall is just not the guy that is going to be dynamic enough. There's still going to be a player in the ACC. It's a non-conference win, but we got to talk about Tennessee. Even though Nico, got his feet wet, threw some picks, they are still going to be one of the most dynamic offenses. Being able to dominate like this, there is a reason why they were favored -8, and that line grew, and I felt confident that if Tennessee's winning that football game, it's going to be by multiple touchdowns pretty comfortably. Nico looks like a guy. That's a game I want to go rewatch the film. But when we talk about USF and Alabama, Tennessee, man, this is a year where you see a lot of the top players kind of look shaky, not as good. LSU, was struggling a little bit with Nichols to begin the year or to begin their game, ended up dominating in the second half, but their running attack is just non-existent right now. They're going to be a pass-heavy team. The best thing about Tennessee in general is just the fact that you have Sampson at the running back position who is really good. It's like they took, what was great about the Hendon Hooker teams, the air raid offense. You took what was great about the Joe Milton teams, which is the running attack, and it's this beautiful marriage, and you get this explosive offense. I still have some concerns about, what is Tennessee's defense in the back half going to look like when they actually get tested? We thought we would see that with Grayson McCall. I don't think he's the quarterback to do that. I think Jalen Milroe is the guy that's going to be able to push the ball downfield, and we're going to be very interested. We will be sat for the Ryan Williams versus that secondary. That matchup's going to be incredible. And also, we could talk about, USF and Alabama real quick. I don't have a ton of takeaways. USF, this is just a weird thing. Like, if this is something that becomes a problem down the line, I'm not trying to pick and choose when I care about something, but objectively, USF came out, basically did what they did last year, made it a dogfight, and then Alabama's athleticism and their skill talent and everything across the board kind of took over to finish that game, made it look more dominating or looked like a bigger blowout than it was. It was a real game towards the end of this until Alabama was able to put up some real points. But I just don't have a lot of takeaways. And I think another game I'm going to shout out that won't be its own video, we got to talk about Oklahoma and Houston. Houston was a team that lost at home to UNLV by 20. It was a dogfight with Oklahoma. I think the biggest problem right now with Jackson Arnold, the quarterback with Oklahoma, is two problems. A, he is turnover prone. I don't believe he threw a pick in this game. I know, actually, I could be very wrong on that. I think he actually did to finish the game towards the end. I could be wrong. The game cast when I was watching it, yes, he threw a pick. The problem I have with Oklahoma right now is, A, I don't think their running attack is as dynamic as they kind of hoped. In back-to-back weeks, Sawchuk and Barnes look good, but not great. And I think that's the crutch that you need your young quarterback to feel comfortable in, as at least he could rely on a good running attack. But on the flip side, Jackson Arnold just will not take what is given to him. There was a play, I remember on the back half, where he takes a shot downfield, which I'm always for, the big plays. But at the end of the day, when you have a guy like Deion Burks and there's about 15, 20 yards of separation and it's an early down, take those yards, especially with a playmaker like Burks. Those are the plays that you got to take every time. And I think that's what's going to be the big difference between Oklahoma. When you have that difficult of a schedule, these are the things that really concern me overall as a team. I think their defense is still going to be lights out, but this team will go as far as Jackson Arnold will allow for him. To my understanding, their next week or in 2 weeks, next week they got Tulane. We just talked about Tulane. And then the following week they get Tennessee at home. Fascinating matchup to see if Jackson Arnold can actually take what the defense is going to give him, because I think that's going to move the ball downfield. You just can't have games where you end 16-12 to a Houston team that objectively is one of the worst in the Big 12. Let's have an honest discussion about the Boise State and Oregon game, because I gave them grace. I'm talking them as in Oregon. I gave them grace for what happened in week 1 against Idaho, even though I probably shouldn't have. This is a team that I was very high on. I didn't want to just, kind of blow them off. You get those weird games because it wasn't like, Dylan Gabriel turned the ball over at a high percentage. It wasn't like they were super, super sloppy on some of their plays. I think it's just one of those weird games of college football. Then you have Boise State, and I predicted that they would win by 18.5, and they win by 3 in a close game. I understand Boise State's really damn good. They were my pick for the group of 5 playoff team, but I just thought with the environment that Oregon was going to come in as, with not only being a favorite, but Dan Lanning having them prepared and as electric as they probably will be for the foreseeable future until they play like Ohio State, that Oregon was going to just dominate. And that's not what happened. And so you begin to wonder, maybe Oregon was a little overrated coming into it. I hate doing the whole overrated, underrated thing, but like this team defensively, I thought, with Dan Lanning being the defensive coordinator from Georgia, that the offense was always going to be all right. Evan Stewart finally had a breakout game. Dylan Gabriel, I don't even think plays bad. Like he's going to have an incredible completion percentage just because this offense is super quarterback friendly. We saw it with Bo Nix, right? Like super, super quarterback friendly. Just get the ball in the playmaker's hands. But defensively, as good as Ashton Genty is, and that dude is solidified in the Heisman race, do not argue with me on that. You begin to wonder, man, can this defense start, actually stepping up to the plate and dominating these games? I think as we look at this game, it's so, I'm not trying to box score watch, but I'm also trying to give context to some of the things that we saw, because this is just one of those games where, yeah, I was objectively really wrong in this. Ashton Genty is a dog. Like, he is the number 1 running back in this class right now, number 1 running back in the nation. But would you believe me if the quarterback for Boise State was 17 of 40 and they only lost by 3? It's not good enough. I don't know if it's, I'm even trying to find out, because I wasn't able to watch the full game. At some point you have to go to bed. if it's the lack of high percentage on third downs, I don't know if it's the inefficiency at the running attack because they ran the ball more than Boise State and had over 100 yards less. The penalties are high. You have 2 fumbles. It's sloppy play. It's sloppy play. And Dan Lanning said it himself. There's a lot to learn from this game, but as someone that was very high on Oregon State, now the red flags are building up. It's not just Idaho and you can chalk it up and be like, hey, listen, I get it. It's biased, but it's Idaho. You get weird games every once in a while. No, this is back-to-back games where you should step up to the plate and be better than what you be better. I mean, just objectively, they have the Civil War next week. I'm not expecting Oregon State to be that good, but it's a rivalry game. I'm not going to try to discredit that. You got Michigan State in a couple weeks, but then it's Ohio State, and that's your marquee matchup. That is the big game of the year. I'm concerned about Oregon. Shout out to Boise State. They're still my pick for the group of 5 to make it to the college football playoff, so I feel better about that. Ashton Genty looks incredible. He is going to get his own video if he keeps up this play. I mean, 9 touchdowns in 2 games, over like 600 yards rushing. It's incredible what he is doing for this team. Oregon has to be better. I thought I'd have a lot more to say. It's just objectively they have to be better. It's a not one of those losses you go in feeling better or you leave feeling better than you did coming in. And that's what I wanted them to do, was dominate this game physically, be able to make plays, like everything across the board, be better than what you were the last week. And so far, they've only been Idaho and Boise State by a combined 17 points. That's egregious. Let's talk about my biggest game of the week, Nebraska and Colorado. This was, take away all the rankings, this was a pivotal matchup between 2 programs who, if they win this game, in the way that they win this game, will set them on a crazy trajectory for the rest of the year. Nebraska wins this game, they potentially go 7-0 going to Ohio State, and they are even in a prime position to potentially make a playoff run depending on how they finish the rest of the season after that Ohio State game, which I think they still end up losing, but you never know in college football. NIU just beat Notre Dame. Colorado wins this. This is a pivotal matchup to the same, if not much larger degree than TCU. This is a signature win for Deion Sanders to continue their momentum from last year. Yes, you may say, what momentum? They went 4-8. This was the worst program in college football that won 1 game this season prior, and they quadrupled it to 4 wins. This would set them on a crazy trajectory for the rest of the season. A team that continuously, whether it's warranted or not, because I agree to the fact that some of the media just tries to find headlines with Colorado, but they also put themselves in these positions as well. It goes both ways. And Colorado walked and talked and treated like they were a Big 12 championship contender. And they're just not. They build their program through the transfer portal. It's the opposite of what Clemson does. Clemson does everything through recruiting, through the traditional sense of high school. They have a vanilla cake, it's good. It's a good vanilla cake, no frosting. Then you have Colorado. It's all frosting, no cake. And it looks good, it tastes good a little bit, but you're going to get a stomach ache after a while. That's just how these programs are built. And Shedeur looks great. He's a good NFL prospect. He's a great college quarterback. Travis Hunter is incredible to watch. I still think he's probably the best player in the nation. But Colorado is just not good enough. They're not good enough. They're not prepared enough. They did not come out with enough energy after getting absolutely punched in the face. They got sucker punched, both of their front teeth out, and they did not put up a fight. They didn't have enough energy in the second half. They looked defeated. That's what the broadcast said. And it looked like it on the field. If you muted your TV, you would think this team looks defeated and the game wasn't even halfway done. And so the question I ask on TikTok, and the question I continuously ask is, what is the plan for Shedeur Sanders and Deion and company after this? Because clearly it's Travis Hunter, Shedeur are going to the NFL. Jimmy Horn probably will get drafted as well, just because that dude's electric in his speed, whatever. But what's the plan for Deion? What's Colorado going to look like the following year? Is Deion going to retire? Was this a 2-year run with his kid? Because he talks about how he's more than just his family and his kids, that this is something he wants to build and become bigger. But if you look at this program, they are clearly so many steps behind it. I get it. They could run the table and probably win the Big 12. If they were to run the table, they win the Big 12. There is, Doctor Strange, there is a reality where that happens. But they look like the same team last year. This gave the same vibes of Oregon from last year. They played a real team and they got mauled. They went into a hornet's nest and got mauled. That was bad. Number 9, I believe his last name's Robertson, looked like Ndamukong Suh 2.0. Dylan Raiola, people make fun of him looking like Patrick Mahomes. He just looked poised. He looked like a guy that was just making magic. I get it. There was a couple plays where Colorado did get screwed. Jimmy Horn made that catch. Objectively, he got his foot in. There was a couple flags that should have gone Colorado's way. I hear you on that. There was even a pick that probably should have been thrown by Dylan Raiola. Pops up in the air. Nebraska makes a play. But leading up to those decisions, the game was already feeling like it was over. I recorded my TikTok when they were down 21-0 because it looked like they had no life in it. They had no life. It was over already. They got punched in the mouth, and it all started with that Tommy Hill pick, which was an egregiously bad throw from Shedeur Sanders because all they can run is shotgun. That's all they got. They cannot run the ball. 5 carries for 32 yards. They're not even trying. They're not even trying to run the ball. It's just not good enough. It's just not going to be good enough to just run shotgun with that bad of an offense. You are looking for a recipe of disaster every single time you face a competent defensive line. Every single time. And so shout out to Nebraska. Shout out to them making the game plan simple for Raiola. Shout out to them for using their running backs and dominating this game for all 4 quarters. I get it. They did not score a single point in the second half, but there was not a moment where you're like, oh, Colorado's fighting back. Hell, they got to 18 points and they basically threw up the white flag. And we have to talk about Shedeur Sanders leaving the game with 2 minutes left, down 18, and going into the locker room. Because if it was for injury, cool. Got it. Hear you out. I hear you out. I'm not trying to be, the old NFL scout that's like judging a man for who he is. But the one thing I want to point out is all through April, in the entire draft process, I had to listen about Caleb Williams and his pain in nails and how he cried on the sidelines after losing to Utah, and people just absolutely torched him. And then if Shedeur Sanders leaves a game early, which objectively is just a bad look, it feeds into the fact that of these rumors, and whether you want to say they're warranted or not, rumors that it is Shedeur and Travis, which it looks like that on the field, and everyone else. But when you do not have that cohesion as a team, it's a bad look. It is a bad look. And my point is if you torch Caleb, torch Shedeur for the same thing. It's not 1-for-1 in the actions, but if you want to dive deeper and ridicule players for this, go ahead and keep it the same energy. It's not a good look, though. I think if it was for an injury and they want to disclose it, fine. But if it's not that, and he just left because they were getting beat down, and he had his I don't know if it was his like friends or because it didn't look like staffers. There might have been a couple, but that leave the field early, that's not a good look. It's not a good look. In Colorado, I have so much more to say. Shout out to Nebraska, a team that is getting a bounce back. People tell me, what is the Matt Rule year 2 effect? This is it. A competent team, a polished team, a team that wants to fight for 4 quarters and shake your hand afterward and say, good game. Because that's what he said. That's the culture he put with this team. And he has full trust with Raiola, and he looks incredible. He looks like Patrick Mahomes. But good job by Nebraska objectively. And if you're at this point in the video, I know we've been talking for about an hour at this point. Good Lord. Thank you so much for watching Rush the Field. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this is one of the longest videos. We're going to cut this up and put it out on throughout the week. So you're going to see this insane outfit once again. But just give me an opportunity to talk football with you. It would mean the world to me. And I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your week.